You won't believe how one man's life changed forever after finding a lost baby fox on the side of a lonely road. What started as a chance encounter turned into an extraordinary journey, one filled with hope, healing, and an unbreakable bond. This isn't just an animal rescue story, it's about how the wild can find its way into our hearts when we least expect it. Sometimes, the ones we rescue us right back. This is the unbelievable story of Jake, a man searching for purpose, and Rusty, the baby fox who gave it to him. Jake's story. Meet Jake, a man whose life had quietly unraveled without anyone noticing. Once full of dreams and ambition, he found himself stuck in the routine of everyday life: work, sleep, repeat. After losing his father unexpectedly, Jake felt like the world had gone silent. The grief was heavy, but what hurt more was the emptiness it left behind. Jake stopped doing the things he loved. His days blurred together, filled with quiet car rides, empty evenings, and a growing sense that he was just existing. He moved through life like a shadow of his former self, disconnected from the world and from himself. One morning, seeking escape from his thoughts, Jake decided to take a long drive through the countryside, a road he'd traveled 100 times before. But that day, something was different. As he rounded a curve, he noticed a small figure crumpled by the roadside, a flash of red fur against the dusty ground. Curiosity pulled him over. As he stepped out of the car, the cool air hit him like a wake-up call. There, lying motionless except for the faintest twitch of its ears, was a baby fox. Its eyes, half closed, dull with exhaustion, met his for a brief second. That fragile, fleeting moment would change Jake's life in ways he never expected. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just an encounter. It was the beginning of an extraordinary connection, one that would teach him about resilience, trust, and the unexpected places where healing begins. The unexpected rescue. Jake didn't hesitate. Something deep inside told him to act. He knelt beside the baby fox, its small body trembling with fear and weakness. The fox's fur was matted with dirt, its breathing shallow, and one of its tiny legs looked injured. Instinctively, Jake took off his jacket and gently wrapped it around the fragile creature. He expected the fox to resist, to snap or scratch out of fear. But instead it simply surrendered, too exhausted to fight, too weak to run. That simple act of trust, whether born from fear or hope, was enough to ignite something in Jake's heart. He placed the fox carefully on the passenger seat, glancing over at it as he drove to the nearest wildlife rescue center. The road felt longer than usual, every bump making Jake's heart race with worry. The fox, now named Rusty because of his reddish coat, barely moved, his small chest rising and falling with labored breaths. When they arrived, the veterinarians rushed Rusty inside. Jake waited in the parking lot, staring at his empty passenger seat, realizing how quickly this tiny creature had filled a space in his heart he didn't know was empty. Rusty's survival was uncertain. The vets said he was dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from exposure. But Jake couldn't walk away. He visited every day, sitting quietly by Rusty's recovery crate, talking softly even when it seemed like Rusty couldn't hear him. Maybe Jake was rescuing Rusty. Or maybe Rusty was rescuing Jake. The healing process. Rusty's recovery wasn't easy. The vets worked tirelessly, hydrating him, treating his wounds, and monitoring his fragile condition. But something unexpected happened during those long days. Rusty started responding, not just to the medical care, but to Jake's voice. Jake visited every day, sometimes for hours, just sitting beside Rusty's crate. He'd talk about his day, share stories about his dad, and even sit in silence, letting the soft rhythm of his voice fill the space. Slowly, Rusty began to stir when he heard Jake's footsteps. His ears would twitch, and his eyes, once clouded with fear, started to brighten. There was no dramatic turning point, no single moment where everything was suddenly okay. It was in the small things, the way Rusty lifted his head a little higher each day, the flick of his tail, the faintest hint of curiosity in his gaze. And for Jake, it was the first time in years that he felt needed. That simple realization began to heal him too. One afternoon, weeks into Rusty's recovery, Jake opened the crate door. Instead of retreating, Rusty took a hesitant step forward, and then another. He sniffed Jake's outstretched hand and, in a fragile gesture of trust, rested his small paw on it. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about connection. Two souls, both lost in their own way, finding comfort in each other's presence. The bond deepens. As Rusty grew stronger, something remarkable happened. He and Jake became inseparable. What started as daily visits at the Wildlife Rescue Center soon turned into hours spent together, learning each other's rhythms. Rusty wasn't just healing physically, he was learning to trust. And Jake? He was rediscovering something he thought he'd lost: purpose. Eventually, the vets gave Jake permission to foster Rusty temporarily, to help him transition back to the wild. Jake's home, once filled with silence and shadows, now echoed with the soft patter of tiny paws and the curious sounds of a rescued fox exploring new spaces. Rusty followed Jake everywhere, his little tail flicking with excitement, his bright amber eyes always watching. They'd sit together by the window, Jake sipping coffee, Rusty's head resting on his knee. Jake would talk, and even though Rusty couldn't understand the words, he listened in his own way, with unwavering attention. They went on long walks, Rusty's wild instincts peeking through as he sniffed the air, ears perked, tail low with cautious curiosity. Jake realized he wasn't just caring for Rusty, he was learning from him, learning to be present, to notice the small things, to find joy in simplicity. Rusty had given Jake more than companionship, he'd given him a reason to wake up with hope. Their bond wasn't about ownership or control, it was about mutual respect. Two lost souls, healing together. The difficult decision. But wild hearts aren't meant to be kept. As Rusty grew stronger, Jake knew the hardest part was coming, the day he'd have to say goodbye. Rusty was thriving, his instincts sharpening with each passing day. He'd chase after leaves, pounce on shadows, and stare longingly at the open woods beyond Jake's backyard. Jake could see it in Rusty's eyes. He was ready to return to the wild where he truly belonged. The realization hit Jake like a wave. He'd saved Rusty's life, but Rusty had saved his heart. Letting him go felt impossible, like tearing away a piece of his soul. But love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to set someone free. On the morning of Rusty's release, Jake packed up the car with quiet determination. No words were needed. Rusty sat beside him, sensing something was different. They drove to a wildlife conservation area, a place where Rusty could live freely, surrounded by forests and rivers, a true fox's paradise. Standing at the edge of the trees, Jake knelt beside Rusty one last time. His voice was steady, but his heart was breaking. "You're ready, little buddy," he whispered, stroking Rusty's soft fur. "Thank you for everything." With one final look, filled with trust, gratitude, and an unspoken bond, Rusty turned and trotted into the wild. No hesitation, no fear, just freedom. Jake stood there long after Rusty had disappeared, tears streaming down his face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of knowing he'd helped something wild find its way home. Life after Rusty. Life after Rusty felt quieter, but it wasn't empty. The house was the same, yet everything had changed. The silence that once felt suffocating now felt peaceful, a space filled with memories instead of loneliness. Jake found himself walking the same trails they'd explored together, his heart lighter, his steps steadier. He'd pause sometimes, staring at the woods, wondering where Rusty was, imagining him darting through the trees, wild and free. But Rusty's presence was everywhere, in the paw prints etched into Jake's heart, in the lessons he'd left behind. Jake learned that healing doesn't come from forgetting pain. It comes from finding something, or someone, that reminds you life is still beautiful. Inspired by their journey, Jake began volunteering at the same wildlife rescue center where he first brought Rusty. He shared their story with others, helping people see that sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us. And on quiet nights, when the stars stretched across the sky, Jake would sit on his porch, close his eyes, and swear he could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of a fox echoing through the woods. Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe it was Rusty, reminding Jake that their bond was never truly gone. Feel-good ending and call to action. Jake and Rusty's story isn't just about a man and a lost baby fox. It's about healing, growth, and the unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Your support helps us tell more stories like Jake and Rusty's, and reminds us all that sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us right back.